the little bing means class is starting, so have a seat. Glad that you are here this evening. Am I a little echoey right now? It is. It's a little echoey, but Kelsey's going to fix it because he always does. Yay, Kelsey. Hey, glad y'all are here tonight. We are going to continue down in our study, session 8. We're going to be picking up where we left off last time, which was we kind of opened, and I'm going to do a brief primer again just for the session, on the book of Judges. Now, before we jump in, let me make you aware of a few things that are happening at City on a Hill, just a little house cleaning. Not really house cleaning, that sounds negative. For what it's worth. How about that? We have two major things going on from an overall, overarching all-church perspective. Number one is, of course, September 15th. I've been talking about on Sunday mornings. Fearless series launches. It's a citywide effort. We have now 2 ads that are running on social media simultaneously. We are going to ask you, if you're on social media and you see it, share it. The first one is a testimony of a girl named Courtney, and the second one is of Linda Castle, both of which have been through the series and received a tremendous amount of help, hope, and healing, and really just a powerful testimony that we're hoping will resonate with some other ladies that see that and will perhaps take a step in faith and sign up. It links directly to the sign-up page online, so all you have to do is share it. You don't have to write anything else extra. Just put it out there. You never know. There may be someone that you're friends with on social media that sees that and would be interested in coming. We're really hoping to use that as an outreach tool as well. They don't have to be Christians. In fact, it's awesome if they're not Christians because there's a whole gospel portion of that. And we're hoping that we'll see some people even come to faith through this process as well. So September 15th, that's the first one. That's a Wednesday night. So September 1st is a week from today. That's when the big portion of our freedom groups begin. And then 2 weeks after that, September 15th, is when the Fearless series begins. Beyond that, September 24th and 5th is our Taking Shape conference. And I mentioned this on Sunday. I'll be mentioning it again over the next several weeks. You'll get tired of hearing it, hopefully, before it's said and done, because that'll mean I did my job, if you're tired of hearing it. It's better than not hearing it at all. It is a really exciting conference. We haven't done an all-church conference in well over a year, obviously because of COVID and a variety of other reasons. This is a Friday night and a Saturday morning. There is going to be food Friday night, about 6 o'clock. We'll serve food, so we need an RSVP so we know how many people to purchase the food for. We'll do street tacos, and it'll be an excellent time. 6:30, we'll kick off with worship. I'm going to do a little vision casting that night. There's a lot of things that we have seen God do here over the last year that have been really just remarkable. And a lot of things that God has ordained, I guess is the best way of saying it, in this church. And so we really want to talk about that and celebrate that. And then we'll spend the rest of that evening in small groups talking about individual ministries. Saturday morning, Paul Gibbs, the founder of the PAIS movement, is going to be here to lead us through something called the Shapes Test. Something that he wrote, kind of a personality test, if you will. You can go to theshapestest.com, I think is what it is, and take the test beforehand. But essentially the idea is that there are 4 shapes, and everyone fits into roughly one of those categories. And it kind of helps us understand that if you're working or serving in an environment with other particular shapes, how to work with them uniquely. And we did this as a staff, and it has been really awesome, really helpful, kind of understanding one another's tendencies and strengths and all that good stuff. So plan on coming to this. This is going to be a great time. We're going to have tables set up in here. It'll be very interactive. These kinds of conferences are always just a lot of fun. There's just a lot of great moments in them. We'll have worship, food. If anything, street tacos are a huge bargaining chip in my mind, right? Even if I don't care about the conference, I'm coming for the food. So going to be a great time. Really looking forward to that. Let me think about that. Is there anything else? One last thing. So, and it is connected to tonight. We're talking about Judges tonight. And I did make the decision in final that September 26th is a Sunday. That is when we will launch our new Bible study curriculum that will take us however many weeks it takes us. I don't ever have a full idea I imagine somewhere around 15 to 20 weeks, but maybe a little bit longer. And we are wrapping up 2 Peter right now. We did 1st and 2 Peter back to back, verse by verse. And that ends the 19th on a recap. The 26th, we begin the book of Judges. So tonight will be a little bit of a primer for that. And for those of you who are not super familiar with Judges, you'll get a pretty good taste of what's in it. But if you want to do the verse by verse study on that, that'll be starting September 26th. I'm really looking forward to writing that. I'm a little nervous, I'm going to be honest with you, because I'm kicking off the first full semester of doctoral work, and I'm engaging a Old Testament study for our church, and I am less proficient in Hebrew than I am in Greek, and so, hey, but it is what it is. It's going to be fun. Judges is a great time. If you have your Bibles open, move them to Judges. That's where we're going to be. I said last week, as I was wrapping this up and we were kind of introducing this book, that Judges takes place in between the death of Joshua and the monarchy, which begins with Saul in 1 Samuel. So you get this rough time period in between Joshua and the monarchy where things go south very, very quickly. So just a brief historical summary so that we're all following along together. You have creation narrative, right? The patriarchy, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Joseph leads the people of God into Egypt. This happens in a matter of kind of it's a matter of men doing evil things and God using them for good. In fact, that's what Joseph says at the end of Genesis. His brothers sell him into slavery, and through a series of rather unfortunate events, God redeems those events, and Joseph becomes the second most powerful person in all of Egypt, only under Pharaoh. And near the end of Genesis, there is a great famine that is coming that Joseph predicts through actually a dream that Pharaoh has. And as a result of that, his family, his brothers and his father are brought into Egypt, and that is where they remain. They stay there for several years. In fact, like 400 years. A new Pharaoh comes onto the scene eventually that is not friendly to Israel, and things go south very quickly. Exodus is where that picks up. Israel is enslaved. God uses Moses to bring them out of Egypt. But that's not the happy ending that we all wanted, because immediately they begin to murmur and grumble, and God sends them on this really terrible 40-year detour where the whole entire first Exodus generation dies, and a second generation comes to being before they move into the Promised Land. Of course, Moses does not go. He dies as well, and they are taken into Canaan, the land of the Canaanites, which is also the land God has given them, by the hands of Joshua, Moses' assistant, if you will. Things are really good when Joshua is around. In fact, we begin tonight with Joshua's death. This is how his story ends. This is in Judges chapter 2, verses 6 through 10. It says, let's see here, where are we at? When Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each to his inheritance to possess the land. So they're in the land now. Tribes are going where they've been directed. Everyone has a position. In fact, just an interesting side story, when I was in seminary doing my first master's degree, we had to memorize the 12 tribes map, which I highly do not recommend. It's terrible. It's an absolute beating, but it was very helpful for that class because whenever we would look at the ancient Near East, we knew, give or take, where the tribes ended up. This is what this is referencing. They are going into their possession, their inheritance, if you will. The people served Yahweh all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that Yahweh had done for Israel. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. All that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know Yahweh, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. Okay, so that's an important detail. That tells us something about the state of Israel after Joshua's death. This is an important detail. Now, it's implied here, it's not explicit, but there's an implication taking place, which is this, that the generation that was with Joshua, that saw the work of the Lord, made one very critical error. They knew the Lord, they were with Joshua, they saw his work, they loved Yahweh. The one error was what? They didn't teach their children. And so another generation arose having no clue what God had done in their midst, having no clue of the miracles that God had performed through people like Joshua and Moses before him. This is a major problem, and this really sets the stage for where the rest of Judges is headed, because now we have no fearless leader that is anointed by God. We have none of the elders who were with Joshua during that time. And we have an entire generation who has no idea what God desires or who even God is, what he's called his people to do. And so it says in verse 11, "Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord to anger." Now, this is a direct violation. If you remember at the very end of Joshua, remember Joshua sets this sort of treaty up with the people of God again, because there has already been, remember the sin of Achan and the idols that he took, which caused the death of him and his family. And then there were several other instances where Joshua was going into battle and the people of God have provoked the Lord to anger because of their idolatrous ways. The end of Joshua, they make a deal with God. We will not go after other gods. We will not marry other people from this land lest we go after their gods. These are the two big rules, and we're going to come back to this over and over again because it's something that God takes very seriously in the Old Testament. Do not worship idols. Do not marry people who are not Israelites because they worship idols and they will make you worship idols with them. And is that not true? I mean, rarely does missionary dating is what we call it. Like, yeah, they're not a believer, but I'm going to go after them, and they're going to love the Lord when they marry me. Often it's the opposite that takes place. It's not them coming after the Lord, it's you going after whatever they're going after as well. It rarely works out that well. So this is a rule that God puts in place very early on for his people, and immediately in Judges, this is what we see happening. Immediately, we go after idols, we begin marrying other people who are also worshiping idols. And so this is the verses 21 through 23. This is God's sort of execution against them because of their sin. He says, "I will also no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk in it as their fathers did or not. And so the Lord allowed those nations to remain, not driving them out quickly, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua." So understand that at the end of Joshua's time, conquest, if you will, the major nations that were removed from the land were not obliterated. They were just sort of waiting. They were waiting in rank for their time to come back and take their land. And because of the sin of Israel, God says, I'm not going to actively punish you. I'm just going to take my hand off of you. And I'm going to let all these people that you've just really ticked off come back in here, and you're not going to have success against them. And therein sets the stage. Israel is in trouble. They have fallen into sin. They have fallen under conquest of these other nations, and they need help. So there's this pattern that takes place in Judges, right? A cycle, if you will, where Israel sins, God judges, Israel cries out, God raises up a judge to redeem Israel. Israel rejoices, and then they sin. And then God judges. And it just keeps going over and over and over and over again. Now, one other point I want to make before we really get into this. Last week, I had a list on session 7 of some of the judges on there, and I showed how each judge that raises up is more morally bankrupt than the one prior to them. So we start with Othniel. He is like kind of the best one of the bunch. We end with Samson. He is certainly the worst one of the bunch for a variety of reasons. And so you see this sort of this sort of decay that takes place in the Judges. Last thing I'll say before we really get into the text, Judges is not a story about how we should act. It's not. These are not men or women, although the woman judge, Deborah, she's solid. These are not men you want to follow after. They're not men you want to position your life around. They're terrible people. And more than anything, they represent Israel in more ways than one, both in a good way and in a bad way. We're going to find that out tonight. We're going to read these stories tonight. And we're going to see, some of them are very short, some of them are very long, some of them I'll paraphrase, some of them I'll read everything there is to read because it's like one verse. And I want to warn you up front that if you are sensitive to violence and or sexual assault, both of those things are going to take place tonight in some of these stories. And so I just want to give you a warning if that is something that is sensitive to you so that you can either prepare yourself or if you need to hop out at some point, then absolutely no judgment whatsoever. We're going to get judgy tonight, but not against you. So that was a terrible pun. I'm sorry. We're in the book of Judges. It is what it is. Let's read. Starting in verse 7 of chapter 3, we begin with Othniel. It says, let's see here. Where am I at? Why is this? Idolatry, Ehud. Okay, here we go. This is not right. Did I make a mistake here? 7. The anger of the Lord was kindled against. Okay, yeah. This is right. The sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Asheroth is another pagan idol during this time. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the sons of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. So they are in conquest now. They have been taken over by Mesopotamia. Not a good thing at all. When the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up the deliverer for the sons of Israel to deliver them. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. And when he went out to war, the Lord gave the king of Mesopotamia into his hand so that he prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. Say that 10 times fast, by the way. Then the land had rest for 40 years, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. Okay? Relatively short story. There's not a whole lot to be said here. There was an 8-year period where they are under Mesopotamian reign. Othniel comes to judge Israel. He wars against this king. The king is brought into his hand. That means he prevails over him. And then for 40 years, they had peace. Things were good. We go to Ehud. This is verses 12 through 30. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now keep in mind, 40 years have gone by. Okay, so I don't want to paint the picture that Judges is just this like constant perpetual sin. Like, the people do repent, and there is some time of peace for a little bit. 40 years ago, I mean, this is like, 1981, right? So the world, starkly different in 1981 than it is today. So imagine, just for a moment, that, there's a little bit of time that has gone by. There's been a little bit of moral erosion that has taken place, and plenty of time for that to have happened. And it says that, again, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and went and defeated Israel. And they took possession of the city of palms. And the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. So the conquest lasts a little longer this time. 18 years, it's a little bit of time. Right? That's a lot of time to be under the authority of a neighboring and enemy nation. Not a good thing. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. It took them 18 years to do so, but they finally did. And the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. I just think that's a little funny. Any left-handed in here? Yeah, okay, one. Mom and brother. So, it's This is a little bit of a tip of the hat to you left-handed folks. Even left-handed people can be used by God. Amen. Very, very exciting for you. Yeah, exactly. The people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. Now, I'm going to just, again, warn you up front. This story is just a little bit graphic. It's a little gross. And Ehud made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. And when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded silence. And all of his attendants went out from his presence. The king doesn't want anyone to know what he's about to say. All of you people get out of here. This guy has a secret message for me. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in the cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat. And Ehud reached with his left hand and took the sword from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and the dung came out. And then Ehud went out into the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. This is very violent, very crazy. And yeah, like Jabba the Hutt, exactly. This is, right? There are no original stories. Completely ripped off Ehud here. It says, when he had gone, the servants came, and when they had saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely he's relieving himself in the closet of the cool chamber. Give the man some time, right? He's in the bathroom. Give him a moment. And they waited till they were embarrassed. But when he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them, and there lay their Lord dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passed beyond the idols and escaped to Serah. When he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and then the people of Israel went down from him, or with him, from the hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to them, follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. And they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time about 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. And so Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. So now we got 80 years. Now we're moving in the right direction. Or are we? Not really. It's about to get very bad. But the point is this so far, that anytime God receives the cries of Israel in true repentance, and he raises up a judge to deliver his people back into freedom, notice how easy it is. And that is one of the key points, one of the things that Judges wants you to understand, is that military might, power, strength, numbers, none of those things matter if they are fighting against Yahweh. It is a joke to him. They can have as many people as they want, doesn't matter. It's a joke. I can take one guy and I can slay your stupid king, and I can take 10,000 of your men down without a single problem, and in the same day, my people have their land back. So it's not a matter of whether or not Israel is strong, or Israel has resources, or Israel is this or that, or they're smart or whatever. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with whether or not they are obedient to God. That is the key. Are they obedient? Have they remained repentant? Now, I will just say, and this is, I think this is a whole other discussion, but again, we often want to go back to what about today in Israel? And I will just tell you that there is something about the land that I believe God is protecting based on other passages that we've already covered, primarily because of the Abrahamic covenant. But when we talk about God protecting a people, specifically Israel, it is only when they are repentant and walking in obedience that God does this. And so that's the question that has to be asked, is that happening right now? Because if it's not, then there's something else going on there. And that's all I'll say. We won't go any deeper than that. We get a third judge, and I'm going to caution by saying maybe a judge. Shamgar is listed here. He gets one whole verse, verse 31. After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. Now, why might I be hesitant to call him a judge? Say again? So there's no period of time, so that is one thing, one great observation. It's not the same formula. Another part of the cycle hasn't occurred, and specifically, he never is said to have judged Israel. That terminology is never really used. Now, it says that he saves Israel, and so this is why we often include him in the list of judges, because he's acting in some way. But there's also another interesting theory out there with regard to this Shamgar individual. It says he's the son of Anath. There are a couple of places in the ancient Near East, Bethanath. There's one more, I can't think of the name of it. But the Anath name is very similar to a Hittite god during this time as well. And given the fact that Shamgar is never given a nationality, we're just told that he's the son of Anath, who is connected to the Hittites, it's possible that he's just some other guy that is not an Israelite, that is also slaying Philistines during this time, because notice, this is not who they're fighting the time before that, but we're about to enter into a portion of Judges where the Philistines become a major problem. And so some people think that perhaps the writer of Judges includes this other character just as a literary device to kind of move us away from the Moabites and now to be talking about the Philistines. It's just an interesting point. Well, go ahead and you do you remember what you said? God on the move, right.
That was the name, that was the meaning of his name.
Mm-hmm.
We were taught. If you believe that also.
So, no.
Okay.
I don't. I don't think it's not possible, but I haven't seen anything very clear. Shamgar is a very interesting figure, and his name is not at all similar to any other Israelite name that we see. And so I'm compelled to think that given he is the son of Anath, which is, again, more of a Hittite flavor, I'm compelled to think that he's perhaps not Israelite at all. Now, that doesn't mean that God can't use him, because we're gonna see that as well. But yeah.
That's very interesting because they built a whole season around that name.
Yeah, and see, so this brings up a great point. Mary's making the point that there was a church that she used to attend where Shamgar, there was a whole season of stuff that name in particular was very meaningful to the life of that church and some of the things that they were doing. This is the one passage, really, where we get Shamgar. There's a reference to him in one other place that is equally, nebulous. And so I would always caution you, ministries, churches, not that they're bad nothing like that at all, but it's not maybe the wisest move to build significant customs, significant practices around very nebulous words, names, titles, phrases, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's wild. Well, and here's the thing. What's interesting about it is, I think it's always well-meaning. This is where the linguistic problem really becomes a problem. Is that there are individuals who will do a lot with the morphology of a word, the makeup of a word in Hebrew or Greek, that really isn't all that clear. Now, and the thing is, it'll preach, right? How many of you know Hebrew and Greek? So I could come out here and be like, Shamgar is like another way of saying city on a hill. And so, and people would be like, whoa, did you know that God predicted we would be a church in these are the kinds of things that guys do. And so, and again, I don't know that it's always like with ill intent or anything like that at all, but it furthers the idea that we ought to be very careful and very sure about the way we're interacting with theology, theological concepts, names, language, so on and so forth. I have a whole degree in linguistics. And if I'm not certain that something it can be, a strong case can be made for what I'm thinking, then I don't say it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking you
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, for sure.
You're that type of person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shamgar.
That way that person still has a large ministry of prophecy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good for them. So, good for them. Now, I'm not at all opposed to a business person taking influence from this and, say, creating a business called like ShamWow, right? Anyone remember ShamWow? The late night infomercials? That was a joke. That was not at all related to Shamgar. What are we doing? Let's move on. Deborah and Barak. This is Judges 4 and 5. Now, let me just say up front, chapter 4 is the story of Deborah and Barak. Chapter 5 is the so-called Song of Deborah, where they are worshiping and thanking God for the work that he has done in their midst, okay? There is some critical things in chapter 5, and we'll talk about that when we get to it, but the main bulk of the story, the narrative, is chapter 4. What happens in chapter 4? What is the story of Deborah and Barak? So at this point, they are again brought under the control of another nation, this time Canaan. Jabin is the king of Canaan who reigned in Hazor, and he has an army commander by the name of Sisera. And these two individuals are the ones that are really bringing terror upon Israel. And so Deborah, it says in verse 4, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. Now, I made this point last week that Deborah is seen in the de-escalation of moral authority as lesser than Othniel, not because of her moral character at all, but because her presence in the line of judges in a firmly patriarchal society indicates that they're incapable of producing a man worthy of leading. So God is raising up a woman now. So that's not to say anything against women or Deborah or that she's less than. It is to say that these men who believed that they were big and wise and wonderful, there was not a single one among them that God thought, I can use him. Right? I'm going to have to use Deborah now because all of you are terrible. You're pathetic. So I'm going with this. And even here, Barak is a man that Deborah asks to go to war against Sisera and Jabin. And he is unwilling to do so. In fact, he says, I will not go unless you come with me. And so she relents and says, okay, I'll come, but if I do that, then you will not get the glory for this victory, a woman will. Now, that's an interesting thing to say, especially because what we find out is it isn't Deborah who gets the glory. It's another woman. So her prophecy comes true because she's never clear about which woman it is. Barak attacks with the troops there, and this is in verse 8, if you're wanting to follow along. If you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. Verse 9, and she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh, and Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. Who are Zebulun and Naphtali? No. They're two tribes of Israel. Yeah. So they are two of the not as well-known tribes, Zebulun and Naphtali. They go with him, and they mount their attack. It says, when Sisera was told that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with them from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river of Kishon. And Deborah said to Barak, up, For this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you?" And so Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him, and the Lord routed Sisera and all of his chariots and all of his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot, and Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. Okay, so we're not told how in chapter 4. Chapter 5, we're going to figure out a little bit more of how this defeat took place, because he's got 900 iron chariots. I don't care if you got 10,000 men or not. 900 iron chariots do a lot of damage when they're used properly. And we're led to believe that Sisera knew how to use them properly. He was a Canaanite commander. He seemed relatively successful. But the battle goes south for him because, again, Yahweh is with him. And so 900 chariots, laughable, right? They fall, but Sisera escapes. He runs off and escapes the battle. The battle is taking place. All the people are dead. Sisera gets away. It says, "But Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite." So they're friendlies to the Canaanites. And Sisera knows that. You are kinmen, or with Jabin the king, I'm safe here. And Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord. Turn aside to me. Don't be afraid." And so he's turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. And he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him, tucked him into bed, nighty-night. And he said to her, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'No.'" But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. And then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was laying fast asleep from weariness. And so he died. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, "Come, I will show you the man whom you are seeking." And so he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with the tent peg in his temple. And so on that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel, and the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. Woo! Remember when I said last week that Judges makes like the best case for an HBO miniseries? This is brutal stuff, right? The man has been fighting. He's worn out. There's probably blood all over him. He's probably been injured a little bit. He's tired. He's been up for a long time. He's been running for who knows how long, at least till morning. He sees this tent, finally, this flood of relief. Oh, thank goodness. The Heber family. Man, we're very close. Jael, yes, the Heber's wife. She looks very nice. And she's motioning me to come over there. And so he goes in, and he's worn out, and he lays down, and he gets tucked in, has his little glass of milk. And she just like, whoa, right? I mean, like that. This is, and then like to make matters even more like, yikes, when Barak shows up, and she's like, "Hey, my lord, the man you're looking for is in my tent." And and I mean, I'm sure he's expecting him to be like there, like sitting there or ready for, I don't know. And just imagine the surprise when he sees this sort of gruesome scene before him, and this sweet little Jael. I say sweet. I mean, she may not have looked that sweet. I don't know. It doesn't describe her, but this is a shocking story. Now, again, Deborah's prophecy is correct, right? The glory goes to a woman, Jael. She's the one that gets the glory for the death of Sisera, and Jabin is also knocked out. Now, with that being said, let's come back for a moment to this discussion of how 900 chariots could have possibly been taken out by these men, apart from the fact that Yahweh's with them. But how does he do it? What means does he use? If we go to chapter 5, verses 4 and 5 tell us. It says, this is Deborah. She's exclaiming to God her gratitude for God's intervention. She says, "Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water and the mountains quaked before the Lord, even Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel." So here's the deal. 900 iron chariots are really effective until there's an earthquake and massive torrential downpour. And then all of a sudden they become pretty ineffective in a battle. Yeah, so God brings in supernatural elements. He commands the weather. He commands every natural part of the natural order. And this is how he renders them useless. It says in verse 20, from heaven the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. So there's this idea that heaven was waging war against Canaan. It was not just the 10,000 men, but God in his divine power brought forth a war as well. This is what stopped them. This is what toppled them. Any questions so far? Haven't asked several. We've passed several things. Any questions from the previous passages we've talked about as well? All right. Well, we'll keep moving then. We'll keep on moving. We get the call of Gideon in chapter 6. Gideon is a very interesting person. Gideon hiding from Midian. The Midianites are the ones attacking. Gideon is raised up as a judge. Now, let's talk about some of the problems with Gideon. Apart from the fact that he leaves Bibles in every hotel room he goes to. It's a joke. He does have some trust issues. So he's a judge, and he's supposed to be trusting that God is working with him and through him and all that, but he has some problems really trusting God. Gideon calls him. It says that he is beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, this is in verse 12, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. And Gideon said to him, please, sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all of his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. Now, real quick, can we pause for a moment and just appreciate Gideon's emotional state? Is this not very reflective of every person when tragedy strikes? Yeah, God was with me. But what happened? Because if God were with me, I wouldn't be going through this right now. Now, the reality is for us, that is rarely the case, that God does discipline us, but overwhelmingly, when bad things happen, it's because we live in a fallen world. And even when bad things happen, God can sovereignly work through those things. It doesn't mean that he causes them, but he can work through them. And so the presence of evil or the presence of tragedy or the presence of heartbreak is not the evidence of God's abandoning us. Right? Although, like Gideon, it certainly can seem that way sometimes. Now, in Gideon's case, it is the result of that because, again, he lives in a different covenant, and this is a part of the deal. You forsake me, I remove my hand, bad things take place, and that's what's going on here. But he's frustrated. Verse 14, and the Lord turned to him and said, go in the might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? And he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you will strike the Midianites as one man. And he said to him, if I have now found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please don't depart from me until I hear, please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you. And he said, I will stay with you until you return. Now this kind of like cat and mouse game goes back and forth several times. He doesn't immediately trust the Lord even after this. He's like, okay, but maybe one more sign, just so we're like certainly sure that things are going to go as you said they are. And then Gideon has his kind of moments of triumph. He destroys the altars of Baal, and he does all the things that he's supposed to do. And then we get to, again, chapter 6, verse 36. And then Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I'm laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor, and if there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. He's still not sure. The story's already started, and he's like marching along. He's like, wait a minute. Are you really going to do what you say? And so he just has real trust issues. Now, I called this in the notes the original 300. How many of you saw that ghastly worldly movie, 300. I didn't. Of course, I pray and fast at all times, but it was a joke. I loved 300 when it came out, man. It came out, what year was that? I don't have Google in front of me, but it had to have been in like the primacy of my stupid young adult male years. Because I remember me and several of my friends, many of whom still attend here and are now mature fathers and wonderful. 2007. So yeah, that was the year I got married. So I was 21. I was dumb as a rock. I married up. I still have no idea how. Miracle of God. We bought 300 on DVD because Blu-ray wasn't a thing. And actually, no, it was HD DVD. I'm dating myself a little bit. HD DVD. Anyone remember that? So I got the HD DVD of 300, and I remember in the behind the scenes, it talked about Gerard Butler and all these guys and like what they were doing on a day-to-day basis to get as shredded as they were. Now, never mind the fact that they were eating like highly finely tuned diets and all these other things. The one thing that we took away as young 18 to 21-year-old guys was they did 500 push-ups a day. And so then, of course, if you follow the natural progression of thought in an 18 to 21-year-old guy, it usually moves next to, we should do that. Now, never mind the fact that we could not do that. I remember every time we tried, I think we ended up cutting it down to like maybe 200 or something. And every time we would see each other, we'd like come in and we would like poke each other in the chest and we'd be like, oh, don't do that, because we were always so sore. That lasted like a solid week before we finally gave that dream up of being Spartan warriors. But in the process, our attention was drawn to Gideon and Judges chapter 7, because this is like kind of the original 300. Gideon is instructed by God. He's going to go to war, and he's going to, bring these mighty warriors of God to win this great battle. He's called Jerubbaal as well in this. That's going to matter in a moment, because we're going to read a passage where that's pretty much exclusively what he's called, and you're going to be very confused. Who is Jerubbaal? It's Gideon. They're the same person. And it says that he has several soldiers, and then it says down, let's see here, this is in verse 3. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 of the people returned. So he had 32,000 soldiers. He's ready to fight. And he's like, hey, if any of you are afraid to go to war, now's your chance. You can go home. And to his surprise, 2/3 of his army, 22,000 men, are like, peace, right? I'm out. They leave. 10,000 are left, though. And it says, the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And anyone whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. And anyone of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, shall not go. And so he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set him by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouths, was 300 men. But all the rest knelt down to drink the water. Now, there was a meme some years ago now. I always think of this. It was like the night before the Denver Broncos went to play the Patriots in the playoffs after Tim Tebow led the Broncos to their one playoff victory. It said, it was the night before, it said, I imagine right now Tebow has his entire team down by the river seeing who laps like a dog. And I was like, that's grade A humor. So 300 men is all that are left. So Gideon's like, this cannot be the way this is supposed to play out. I had 32,000 men, I now have 300. Again, why would God do this? Why would God shave the numbers down? Because God wants people to be aware that there is not a problem with defeating anyone as long as Yahweh is present. This is that theme again. There's no way 300 men could win this fight unless Yahweh's with them. Now this goes all the way back. For those of you who are newer, did not come in the session that we talked about Deuteronomy. There's a passage in Deuteronomy where essentially what God says is, when he divided the number of mankind into their respective groups, he did so by the number according to the number of the sons of God. And so essentially, and that's an angel reference. So essentially what Deuteronomy is saying there is that God divided the nations and moved them where they are supposed to go, and the number of nations is equivalent to the number of angels. And the implication there is that each of those nations was given an angel as a protector. And that anytime earthly wars took place, earthly altercations took place, the same kind of altercation is taking place in a heavenly realm as well. These angels are sort of mimicking what is happening on earth. But God is very clear that Israel is his portion and his inheritance. In other words, all the nations have angelic representation except for Israel. Israel has Yahweh. So this goes all the way back to Deuteronomy, and we're seeing it unfold here as well, that this question keeps coming up. How is it that Israel can come into Canaan and take total control of the land? They're a band of migrants. They're not a well-developed army. They're not even a kingdom. They've literally just come out of the wilderness for 40 years getting their tail kicked by God. How do they then go into Canaan to people who have been there for decades, if not centuries, and just clean house? It's because Yahweh is with them. And no one can stand against him when he fights along by them. Exactly. Yeah. And in the stories that you end up seeing, I mean, you continue to move through these stories. We get it in Joshua. We get it in Samuel. There's a lot of places where we haven't had time to read every single story. Otherwise, we'd be here for like 2 years. But, I mean, it's like some of the stories are just incredibly ridiculous sounding. Like, hey, I want you to take a lamp, and I want you to put it inside of a jar of clay. And I want you to go outside, and when it's nighttime, I want you to throw the jars down, so all of a sudden the lights show up, and then I want you guys to yell, and that's literally the whole plan. And what's going to happen is, the people who are in the kingdom, I'm going to strike fear in their hearts. They're going to see all these lights all of a sudden that come up. They're going to think a massive army is on our doorstep, and they are going to flee the city, and you're going to take control of the kingdom without ever having to even kill anyone. But, oh, by the way, I also want you to follow them all and kill them anyway. I mean, this is insanity. I mean, so it really, I say all that to say, I think it brings out all the more, what's the word I'm looking for? It heightens the crime of the Israelites every time they rebel against God. They haven't just been going to Sunday school their whole lives and heard great stories and oh, grandma one time got sick and we prayed for her and we think God healed her, but maybe it was just the ibuprofen. And that's not to diminish any of the stories, right, that we experience in the modern church today. And there have been certainly more, but these are like, none of y'all have been here. None of y'all have been in a group of 300 people up against every odd that says you should be dead before morning and you wipe out an entire army. These are like life-changing, you never forget these moments. You tell every single person you ever meet for the rest of your life about this moment, and yet it takes them a couple decades before they fall back into sin and rebellion against God. How stupid do you have to be to do that? And I think that's some of the reason why Judges gives us these really incredible, incredulous stories, is because it's meant to show us that these people weren't just rebelling against God because they were kind of living lukewarm lives. They were getting the top-notch miracles, and it still wasn't enough. Which is why Jesus says, when he comes onto the scene and people begin asking him for signs, a wicked and adulterous generation is that who seeks for a sign. You think a sign's going to save you? You think a sign's going to make you believe, give you any more faith than you already have? No, it never has. It never will. The only thing you get is the sign of Jonah. We'll talk about what he meant when we get to Jonah. But yeah, these stories are meant to show us just the audacity that these people had to dare go back to trying to do things their own way, or to dare chase after false gods. God is doing unimaginably awesome things. We get to chapter 8. Any questions on that one? We're spending a little more time in Judges tonight. This is all I intend to do tonight is Judges, because I really did want to kind of highlight some of these major stories, some of the different judges that we see, but also because I do think it is a fun sort of primer before our Bible studies on Sunday morning deals with this as well. In chapter 8, 29, I put 29 through 25, it's supposed to be 29 through 35, we get the death of Gideon. So Gideon's story comes to an end. Gideon dies. It says, now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. So again, lest we think that Gideon is a good guy, he's not. He's a womanizer. He has a lot of wives. He has a lot of kids with those wives. And oh, by the way, if that wasn't enough, he also had a concubine who he had a child with as well. And he called his name Abimelech. Verse 32, and Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash's father at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side, and they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. We get to chapter 9, and Abimelech, there's this sort of side story where Abimelech, the illegitimate son of Gideon, makes himself king. And this does not last a super long time. The people eventually kill him. They don't even want the illegitimate son. They don't want no one. They want no one telling them what to do. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. We get to, let's see here, chapter 10. There's just a couple judges that are mentioned here, Tola and Jair. After Abimelech there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim, and he judged Israel 23 years, and then he died and was buried at Shamir. And after him arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years, and he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Kamon. These kinds of details, by the way, they're important more for the original audience and not us. This would have been an important marker for the context of that time, because they would have likely have known these cities. They would have heard these stories. And so what the author of Judges is doing here is connecting fables, but are not fables, they're real stories, but things that people have heard through oral tradition, and confirming that these are all connected to this sort of biblical narrative that is taking place. And then we get to Jephthah. Jephthah's a strange story. Jephthah is another judge. We won't read his whole story, but we will get to the end, because this is one of the, I think, more hard to understand and challenging stories in Judges. Jephthah makes one of these vows with God where he says, basically, God, if you will act and do what, only you can do, then I will make a vow. The first person who comes out of my house, I will offer to you as a burnt offering. And what we find is when he comes back, it's his daughter that comes out of the house. And he is, of course, grieved horribly that his daughter is the one. He's got to keep the vow. And there's this whole bit in there where she's upset that she's still a virgin. So she goes and mourns for 2 months and comes back still a virgin. There's very intentional detail about that. That was apparently a really big deal to her. And then he burns her and offers her as a sacrifice. And it says that the women during that time every year had a festival to celebrate her for 4 days in that area to kind of honor her. So there's a couple takeaways from this particular story. This is a story that has caused a lot of people a lot of grief. In fact, one person that I know of for sure that there were other things going on, but that led them away from the faith. This was like a faith killer for them. Because why would God allow such a thing to happen, right? Why is this? How can this be the God that we serve? This is the kind of attitude that people have when they read this story. And there's a few things I'll say about it. One, when we read the Old Testament, it's important that we distinguish between what God commands of us and what the people of God do in their own intentions. God specifically commands against human sacrifice several times. In fact, it's punishable by death. And so we can't hold God hostage here for this, because we're never told in this story that God is approving of this, that this is what he desires. In fact, the way it's written in Hebrew almost suggests a condemnatory style. So it's not very uplifting to Jephthah. But two, Jephthah, as all the judges, are meant to illustrate the condition, the spiritual condition of Israel during their time. So not only do they make stupid vows like, I'm going to burn whoever comes out of my house if you'll slay this army, but they're also so dumb that they don't understand the Bible well enough to know that he actually didn't have to do this at all. If you read Leviticus chapter 27, it's been several weeks now since we've been in Leviticus, but we can go back to it. Leviticus 27. There's actually a part of God's law in here that would have made it very easy for Jephthah to escape this. It's a portion on vows. Last chapter of the book. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel." This is verse 1. "And say to them, if anyone makes a special vow to the Lord involving the valuation of persons, then the valuation of a male from 20 years old up to 60 years old shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. If the person is a female, the valuation shall be 30 shekels. If the person is from 5 years old up to 20, the valuation shall be for a male 20 shekels and for a female 10. If the person is from a month old up to 5 years old, the valuation shall be for a male 5 shekels of silver and for a female 3. And if the person is 60 years old or over, then the valuation of a male shall be 15 shekels and a female 10. And if someone is too poor to pay the valuation, then he shall be made to stand before the priest, and the priest shall value him. The priest shall value him according to what the vower can afford." Now, by Leviticus 27 standards, Abimelech owed 30 shekels. That's all he had to do. 30 shekels and your daughter runs free. Or, Abimelech, if you're too poor to pay that, then just go to the priest and he'll give you a number fitting for that's kind of based on inflation and all those things that you can afford. But Abimelech wasn't familiar with Leviticus 27. Abimelech didn't treasure God's word, nor live by it. And so doing something that he thought was spiritual led him to do something that was actually sinful. That's the takeaway from Jephthah that we're supposed to get. Spiritual things are not always biblical things. You got to understand that. There are a lot of spiritual people in the world, and not a lot of them are biblical. And they land us in all kinds of detrimental situations if we're not well versed with Scripture. If we're not well versed with Scripture. Yeah, absolutely. Questions? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So sometimes it's the angel of the Lord. Sometimes it's clear that that's the case. I think that we can follow pretty clearly the models. Well, we haven't talked about that yet. We're going to get to that in the prophets. So one of the things that we're going to talk about when we get to the prophets, the Nevi'im, is the fact that God speaks in a variety of different ways, even to the prophets. And I think that we can apply that same line of reasoning to the judges as well. Sometimes it's through an angel. Sometimes it's through a vision. Sometimes it's through a dream. Sometimes it's an audible voice. Sometimes it's an inner voice. He does it in a lot of different ways. The burning bush kind of scenario doesn't seem to be something that he does with any sort of regularity. Of course, Balaam and the donkey speaks to him through a donkey. But beyond that, it's typically in some form like that. We also have the Urim and Thummim that we talked about, that diviners during that time would receive some kind of messages from God through these sort of sacred accoutrements, if you will. Unless it says an angel of the Lord speaking to the judges, I think that is not clear. Yeah. It's a great question. Any others? All right. Keep moving. We'll keep moving. I'm going to skip over Ibzan, Ellen, and Abdon, okay? Here's why. It's like 3 verses, and they're fairly insignificant people. Again, they're judges. They do their thing. A little bit of time passes. Let's get to Samson, because everyone wants to talk about Samson. Samson does some things in here, and Samson's a hard person to figure out, because on the surface it looks like he's just this ruthless guy who does whatever he wants, and he has no regard for God, and I think in a lot of ways that's absolutely true. I'm not sure that all the bad press Samson gets is warranted, and I'm not sure all the connections we make to Samson are as clear as we might think they are. One of the things that we said in the beginning of Judges that God explicitly tells them not to do, both there and in Joshua, is don't intermarry with people of the land. Don't do it. It's going to lead to bad things. I will discipline you. Samson does exactly that, right? And he marries a woman that is not, she's not an Israelite. But there's a reason for it. And it's a holy reason. Her name is Timnah. She's a Philistine. And so she takes the wife from the uncircumcised Philistines. That's what how it reads. But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." Now, real fast, that's a phrase that's going to be very prominent for Samson. Dad, I got to marry her. But son, she's not an Israelite. Why? But look at her. That's my whole line of reasoning. But just look, I got to have her. I mean, this is horrible reason to marry someone. But what we're told here in this story is that Samson's marriage is a part of a divine plan. Verse 4, his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. And at that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. So God's like, you know what, this one instance, I'm going to let you marry this Philistine woman. Normally it would lead to idolatry. Normally it would lead to bad things. That's why I've said don't do it. But at this point, the Philistines are already ruling over you, and I am going to rout them out. And I'm going to use you and your marriage to her to do it. Now, can we just say for a minute, poor Timnah, right? I mean, she's just this pawn in a game. Marriage means nothing but a military advantage. But we're not supposed to mourn over her because she is a Philistine and they are evil. That's the story that is kind of woven throughout this. Now, chapter 15, you start getting Samson laying the smackdown on the Philistines. It happens over and over and over again. But verse 16, we'll start in verse 14. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. And then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arm became as flax that he has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put out his hand, and took it, and with it struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have struck down 1,000 men. He sings a little song to celebrate his little victory. Now notice that Samson is very clear in his song about who is doing the winning here. Me, Samson. I am. I'm the one that struck him down. I'm the one who took down 10,000 men. We're not even sure if Samson was aware that God was working with him. Now, I think he was, because there's a point in which he figures out later that God is not working with me. And so I think he understood that. But very vain individual, very self-serving individual. Now, this is one of those, again, that Samson is a Nazirite. We mentioned that last week. So he took a Naziritic vow, which included not touching anything dead, no dead bodies, no cutting your hair, no drinking alcohol. This is one of those instances where we go, well, he's touching a dead body, so, right? What's that all about? In Numbers, the Nazaritic vow specifies to include the body of your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, I think a couple of other relatives. They're all human bodies. Now, there are biblical laws that entail not touching dead animals at all for cleanliness issues, but they're not Nazaritic laws. And so this is one of those instances where I think probably we wage some unfair judgment against Samson that is not warranted. I'm not sure he's breaking Nazaritic vows here because this is a donkey. In fact, if he's at risk of breaking any Nazaritic vows, it would have been from touching the dead people, the 1,000 dead people he just slain. And we know he does because he takes some of their clothes off of them. So he would have had to have handled dead bodies there. And that certainly would have been a strike against him. The donkey jawbone, it's a fresh one. That means it wasn't dry and brittle. Would have been against some of the customary laws, but not necessarily a Nazaritic law. Any questions there? I'm going to try to speed up a little bit because we only got 10 minutes. See how much time flies when we're having fun? Are we having fun, judges? Judges 19 and 20. This is really, we'll just move on from Samson. Y'all know the rest of the story. Delilah cuts his hair. He loses his strength. God gives it back to him. He pulls the pillars down. Everyone dies. It's a horrible story. But he is sort of redeemed in that. 19 and 20, I wish I could tell you were better stories. They're actually worse stories. They're absolutely terrible stories. 19 and 20. So chapter 19 covers a Levite who has a concubine. And he apparently loves this concubine very much. He's a sojourner. He's traveling through the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim. And it says that he took this concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to the father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for some 4 months. And then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. And he had with his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. The story goes on. They're reunited. They're traveling, and they end up in a place called Gibeah. And while they are there, a lot of the behavior in Gibeah is similar to what we found in Genesis 19 in Sodom and Gomorrah. These are individuals who are so sexually immoral that they demand to rape him while he's there. And he's staying in a stranger's house at this point. Rather than giving the man who at this point, the Levite, has already gone to sleep, to the crowds, he says, well, I'll just give them his concubine because she's just his concubine. She doesn't have any value. Never mind the fact that she's a human being created in God's image. But she's a concubine. So they give her to the crowds, and she is brutalized, it says, for the entire night by an uncountable number of individuals. In the morning, when they wake up, she's left on the doorstep. She has died at this point, and the Levite finds her. He tries to wake her up. He realizes, I think he puts 2 and 2 together. He puts her on his donkey and heads home. And then he does something even more inexplicable that makes very little sense to our Western modern minds. He takes his knife and cuts her into a bunch of different pieces. And he sends pieces of her to all the 12 tribes as a judgment on these tribes for what they've allowed to happen. But it gets even more confusing than that. So in chapter 20, the tribes gather, the chiefs of all the people are there, and it says in, verse 3, tell us, how did this evil happen? And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night, and they meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead. And so I took hold of her and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. And what proceeds to take place is that the tribes determine, because Gibeah is under the rule of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, they will set out war against Benjamin. And they kill pretty much all the wives. It's a horrible story, and a lot of other people die in the midst of it. Now, I want to, again, sort of juxtapose two things that are happening here at the beginning and at the end, okay? Because this, I think, the end of Judges is meant to kind of line up in some parallel forms to show us how far things have gone badly for Israel over these 21 chapters. There's some linguistic parallels that take place in the way things are worded. In the beginning of Judges, the question is asked, who will go with us to fight against Canaan? Right? Because Canaan is here and we got to knock them out. This is before Joshua dies. This is in chapter 1. At the end of Judges, the question is asked, who will go with us to fight against Benjamin, one of our own tribes? So in 21 chapters, the people of God go from a unified group going into the promised land to take what God has given them. And by the end of the book, they are deciding to war against one another because of this horrific crime that was committed against a concubine woman in Gibeah. I wish I could tell you the story gets better, but it actually continues to get worse. After all of this takes place, Benjamin, the tribe, repents. But a vow is made by the rest of the tribes that we will not give daughters to be wives of any of the Benjaminites ever again. We will not do it. And because they've made a vow, never mind Leviticus 27 and the whole vow clause, we can never give our daughters away to marry your people. And this creates a season of mourning because they believe now Benjamin is about to be over with. The tribe is going to die. There's no one to carry on the lineage. There's no wives. But then they hatch this plan. And the plan is to go and take wives from Jabesh Gilead. Go and kill and take all the people and take wives for you. But the problem is that there are about 600 men that need wives and only 400 women that they get out of this whole thing. And so 200 of them are left. And so this is the final plan. This is in verse 16. The elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that the tribe may not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives from our daughters. For the people of Israel swore, 'Cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin.' So they said, 'Behold, there's a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebanon.' And they said, they commanded the people of Benjamin, 'Go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. And if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch them, each man his wife, from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, like you would when your daughter is kidnapped and forced into marriage, then we'll say, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take each man for his wife in battle. Neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty.'" So you understand what's happening. We didn't force it by sword, so you can rejoice in that. We didn't kill your sons, and you didn't give them to us, so God really can't be mad at you, because remember that whole vow we made. So just let it happen, man. And this is how Judges ends. This is where Israel is. In fact, the very last verse, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Judges is a horrible book. It's a terrible story about how when the people of God are left to their own devices, they're as bad as the pagans that they are set against. It's an incredible story because what it does also is highlight the fact that we are no different than anyone else apart from the saving grace of God. Lest we think that we're morally righteous or superior to the other people out there, and I believe this is true for us today as well in the church, don't be under any delusion. We're no worse. We're no better. We're just the same. And apart from God's grace in our lives and redemption, we would be just like them. We would be just like them. Now, I do want to say quickly, we'll do Ruth next time. And Ruth takes place on a chronological timeline during Judges. So this is a story within a story. This is like The Walking Dead and then Fear the Walking Dead, kind of the side story, but in the same. That was a terrible connection, I'm sorry. But it's the same thing. It's a spinoff, right? It's a story that's happening in the same universe, same time frame as Judges. That will not take a whole lot of time. We won't spend a ton of time in Ruth, and then we will kick off with 1 Samuel and begin to talk about how Israel moves from the time of Judges to the monarchy. God bless you all. Question, yeah. Yeah.
This last verse. Mm-hmm. Does the latter half of the verse have anything to do with the woman?
With what?
It says everyone did what was right in his own eyes, right after it said there was no king in Israel.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, because there was no one telling them what was right and wrong. There was no one directing righteous. There was no one demonstrating righteous leadership. Usually, as the king goes, the people go. And so without a king setting a holy or a righteous dictate, everyone just lived morally subjective. We should expect it. Yeah. Yeah. Question? Right. So I would have to check on that. Levitical law, not too sure it condemns it. I think there's probably some things going on there with regard to like inheritance and stuff that are not working out favorably for the concubines. But concubinage was a practice. I mean, there's no question about it. They did not receive inheritance. They did not receive a lot of social upstanding, but most women didn't in this time. Even in the valuation of people in Leviticus 27, when we talked about that with the vow, you noticed a decrease in valuation the younger you get. That's not to say that God doesn't value like infants more than he does people, but an infant can't work the field like a 20-year-old male can. And a 20-year-old female probably isn't going to work the field like a 20-year-old male. So the valuation is based on essentially, what do I get out of this person? What is this person worth? And that is not a reflection, I don't think, as much of how God thinks about people as much as this is just the cultural norms, and it's a norm still today in parts of the world. Several parts of the ancient Near East and even into the African continent, you have not a valuation like that, but the idea that the more kids I can have, the more I can accomplish. And so polygamy is a major practice not because a guy just wants as many wives as he can have, he wants as many kids as he can have. Because there's bartering, there's prestige, there's power with numbers. Do you have another question? No, not explicitly, no, it was not. Yeah, wild, I know. Now it becomes a sin, just to be clear. So understand, this brings up a good point, and if you have to go, I fully understand, but this is a really great question. You can think about Revelation, not the book, but just God revealing, as sort of a funnel, right? A cyclone, if you will, where Genesis is at the top and the New Testament is at the bottom. So God is slowly revealing himself in far more general ways up here in the beginning, and then as time progresses, he becomes more and more specific. So he never says, go and have as many wives as you want. He never says that. In fact, he says, the two shall become one flesh. This is in Genesis, right? A man and woman shall come together, leave their homes, new families created, so on and so forth. But there's never explicit direction that you can't have a concubine. And even in Abraham's story, we see a lot of that same kind of thing happening. Not Abraham, Isaac? Where am I? I'm losing my... In the patriarchs, we see that happening. Even, and Jacob's probably the best example because he's got like several concubines and several wives. God never explicitly condemns that. But throughout those stories, things work out very poorly for him because of those setups as well. And I think we are meant to take note of that a lot of Jacob's trouble comes from the fact that he's got more wives than he should have. He's got more women in his house than he should have. That creates, Solomon is a fantastic example, and again, way further down into the redemptive story where that's kind of his undoing, is all the women. So by the time you get to the New Testament, yes, it's clear. No concubines, You don't, that God is very specific now, but just because he's not clear up here doesn't mean that he approves or blesses either. Does that make sense? Yeah. Great question. Any other questions? Preguntas, if you're a Spanish speaker? All right. God bless you. See you next time.